Okay, picking up on part 2 here. So all of that's available at All Access that you can join and get a huge amount of information on radionics training and everything else. It's a great investment, and it's a great way to support us as well as look around at the products that we offer right now. So now what are we talking about here? So it's not an electromagnetic process. None of the models that are built out there by anybody since the 1920 or whatever the first pseudo-radionic unit came out. Because, the electric reaction of Abrams, he never called it radionics. So it was the electric reaction of Abrams, ERA. That's the original, of course, a radionic. And he made different boxes which are still available today. I have some of his boxes. I've worked with them. And there are a few museums around the United States that still have his technology. Abrams, of course, was a genius guy. He was the son of a Jewish merchant in San Francisco, got his medical MD license or graduated medical school before he was legal to practice, and then went over to Europe and got a medical degree over there as well. So this guy is quite a genius in that aspect. And of course, this is pre-pharmaceuticals. So the whole idea is that there wasn't pressures from drug companies to only follow their way. People were looking for anything that would work because there wasn't any pharmaceuticals. So that's not the case now. We live in a pharmaceutical doctor age where they, what pill do you give somebody? And I certainly understand that as a way of healing people, certainly very practical and makes sense. Well, you can't have this guy to go to therapy, do this, do that, all around the world if you can just pop it out of a bottle. So the whole idea is that makes a lot of sense. But what happened is that since there is no pharmaceutical cures, it becomes, as the definition of a medical drug, for the treatment of symptoms of a particular illness. So that's what the definition of a pharmaceutical is, not the cure of. Okay, and since they had the treatment of the symptoms, well, why not just keep treating symptoms and making money off of it? So what happened there is that became an end-all, be-all and turned into, of course, the number one business on the planet when you really get down to it, if you can put it all together, is health and long life and healing. Basically, that's the number one business out there. When you combine everything together, because a lot of things connect to that, whether it's health foods, vitamins, supplements, doctors, all the sundry stuff that you take, proper shoes. I mean, if you add it all together, what really is a health aspect, it's easily the number one business out there with God knows how many trillions spent on it. Because everybody gets sick, old, and croaks. And the bottom line is that this is a serious issue. Taking a dirt nap is not exactly fun. So this is what happened. Now, that's Abrams, of course, and Abrams did there. He came back. He came up with it. There's lots of ins and outs, and we detail this in our complete radionic course that should be out soon as well. But all of this is a particular situation that you should be informed of in the long run. And pretty much all of this training is in our Radionic Institute on All Access in our Radionic Tech website. So from there, of course, the units, as we are more familiar with, and apparently where the term radionic came from was Ruth Drown's, as far as we can trace it, even though radionic or radionics has been a typical term since the invention and the marketing of radios. So it's kind of one of those words that nobody really knows where it came from, but that it was thought by Ruth Drown that the energy coming out from these boxes was a radio wave in nature, which of course is completely bogus. There's nothing radio wave about it. There's nothing Hertzian about it. There's none of that because that's not how it works. Now, these non-electric type machines that Ruth Drown produced and sold en masse, and as well as was then taken over by Delaware in England, are very typical and common to the kind of radionic instruments that you will actually see. So this is all very, very typical of what things. And of course, there's been very little changes by anybody but radionic tech into these structures and the use of radionics in general. It's still the same old procedures. People have tried to toxify it and make it stupid, like electronic or units are. Anything that is electronic is a bunch of garbage. This includes things like the SE5 and anything else that is based in some sort of electrical nature, thinking that this works. It really doesn't. The fact that at a certain level, energies are picked up at a very low range, that you pick up energies from the electromagnetic spectrum, is missing the point. And I've talked about this in many of my lectures, so make sure you go through all the lectures on this particular channel as well. I don't want to repeat myself. So it's important to understand the nature of it. If you don't understand the nature of the energy, you certainly can't build an instrument to access that. So if you're trying to move water and you don't know what water is, and you're trying to, well, I can move air with my water moving device, does that make any sense? Well, your average scientists think it does, and particularly the scientists who call themselves radionic people. The bottom line is that's really sad that all these things come into fruition here, that we have such boobs on there. So there is a serious problem with understanding that entire process and what goes on out there. So Abrams started this kind of thing, and of course an Abrams instrument is very different, and so is a Ruth Drown, but there is a similarity to all of them, and as I said, you can find these in some electronic museums around the United States, where they actually have these types of devices. The person who invented the pacemaker, I forget their actual company name now, has an electric medical museum, I believe, in Minnesota, and they have some of these instruments there. Very interesting. So getting back to Abrams, of course, died fairly young, in his middle 60s, from some sort of flu. The person who picked up from him mostly, and there's all sorts of people involved, but we'll jump ahead to Ruth Drown. Ruth Drown then got persecuted by the Los Angeles district attorneys, and they went around to all the chiropractors, anybody who had radionic instruments, with axes, and they destroyed them all. She was arrested and spent a little bit of time, I believe, in jail and harassment, but ultimately got off with a small fine. I think it was only $500, and continued to practice in one way or another until she, I think, died at like 73 in Los Angeles. She did spread everything over to England, who took up the torch of it all, and where it is semi-illegal. There's a lot of, you just can't go out and say you're curing people. Like everything else, there are guidelines behind it, and fairly strict ones in the UK, but there are those people doing that. So that's the reality that you have out there in terms of where radionics came from and where this type of box. Now, this is almost identical to a Ruth Drown box. You get your, you need to have at least 9 dials, or it's a waste of time. If you think that you can tune anything in 3 dials, you don't understand radionics. It's just not enough tuning to do anything with. A 3-dial, quote, RAID, or a 3-dial bioenergetic frequency, which is not Hertzian in nature, you can't tune properly with 3 dials. Just as simple as that. Nor can I go into all the differences of how things are made and what all this means. You have to get our Radionic course. This is just going to be a quick actual idea of how to make something. Now, here's a very typical box, as I said. This was made in Argentina by a pretty sloppy maker, but what he did is the basic wiring and everything else is pretty good. Radionic machines have 2 ones. They have an input plate and an output plate. A witness, this is generally the witness, and this is generally your rubbing plate, or the output plate. Energy flows basically from the input plate through the dials in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You don't go 1 and 9. No, they flow in sequence like this until they go to the out plate. Now, your input plates, and we'll start right from there. Well, let's get back to the actual case. Now, I prefer wooden cases in general. I think that it has a nice resonance. Plastic is okay. It is a carbon. It is natural in its own way. It certainly is not conflicting, which I thought it was in the past, but it really isn't. So using a plastic case, but having is fine, but they're harder to drill into, so is metal and everything else. Wood seems to be very inexpensive generally. You can make it to any size you want. And there is a resonance to wood. Wood is basically a semiconductor. There is fluid or water within wood that transfers the energy at a very low rate, but it does transfer. So it's kind of conductive. There is a conductivity to wood, but it's mostly neutral. And as I said, usually people can make boxes. They have some sort of wood around easily. And as I said, you can customize it. And quite frankly, metal boxes can run you hundreds of dollars. Plastic boxes are pretty cheap, but they have a limited size and everything. So having a wood box that you can make to any size is certainly a way to start. There are lots of box makers or boxes you can buy pre-made. Just make sure you get your sizes right. Make sure the box has a great enough depth to work in. So it should be about 2 inches to do that properly. That's all part of the procedure that you should be cognizant of and know what's going on. So size is important when it comes to making something so that you have the exact size that you can need. And, you can do that with wood. You can't do that with much of anything else. So it is important to do that. So that's the nice thing about wood, and it's easy to drill in. Here's a bunch of in and outs, which are important for feeding energy in and then taking energy out of the unit. And again, all you have to do is drill a hole of the appropriate size. This was for some sort of further adapter. This was an on and off switch. These are the type of things you can put on there if you desire, and we'll go over all that stuff as well. Now, one of the most difficult things is that this is a person who I don't like, and one of the reasons why I didn't follow through with this person. But you can do this if you want to. This is just cheap particle board or even cardboard that he printed out on adhesive paper, the dials. And that means the registration dials here. So he printed this out and then put it down on here so he has the registration dials. Now, I find that, again, to be kind of difficult and to do, but certainly will cost you a little less money. You can buy dials that have they have a plate here that shows you 0 to 100 is always best. You could have 0 to 10 because this is a base unit, but having 100 means you can use any rates that way because that's what Hieronymus rates are based on, is 0 to 100. So the whole idea is, and these are just very cheap knobs. These knobs you can get probably anywhere from 50 cents to $1, maybe even less, where you can put that on a printed plate like this, okay? And you're going to need at least 9 of these because you want to have 9 again for proper tuning. So how you make this, but there are a lot of dials you can buy, which are much better to use, that actually have the plates that come with it. You get a dial, which has a little notch on it like this does, but you also have this comes already made and printed on a metal plate that you put down first and then you put the dial over it. I recommend those. It depends how cheap you want to do, what your skills are and everything else. If you print something like this, you're going to have to make sure you line it up properly so that the dials are correct as well. That seems to be harder as well, but it's up to you. This is just a printed out piece of adhesive paper here. You're also going to need 2 new plates. Now, again, here, this person made it as cheap as possible. This is basically circuit board, okay? And you can see that from here. You can see on the back here, that's a plastic circuit board. On the front of it's clad, as they call it, with pure copper. But there's a problem with doing this. This is, again, not recommended. You should use a pure copper plate. This should be copper through and through for best conductivity if you're going in that direction, which is what the old machines do. Now, he has made a little circle here, which is pretty good, but there's really no connection between this wire and the plate itself on top. So you put energy into the copper plate and it goes into basically what is non-electrical conducting plastic. That is generally not the way to do it. So if this was a pure copper plate, what you would do is this would be conductive. The wire underneath here would be pure copper, touching the pure copper, bringing the energy from the top to the bottom. So that's what you want to do. What I'm showing you here is a very inexpensive and made. It's okay made, but it's got a lot of problems. Now, it's also good where you position your plates. Now, at the top like this, which is your input plate, you can put a lot of stuff in here. You've got a lot of space. You've got a nice plate. And, of course, the output plate, or your rubbing plate, you're going to have to turn the dials while holding your pendulum here. So if you have it up here, it's kind of a stretch. If it's down here below, that's one of the best designs. So, and we'll get into that as well, but that's why you have a plate at the top and you have a plate at the bottom. And then you have the dials in between. And the more space you have between dials usually is a good idea as well, because this can be difficult to tune if everything's all scrunched together. Now, Radionics is very dependent upon the use of a pendulum and sensing what is called the rubbing plate, that you get a stick, which is what I don't recommend. You use a pendulum, that's the best way to get your rate. But we'll get into that. But you have to understand this is not about really using your unit, it's about building one. I will have instructions at the end of this that will discuss basic uses, quick and to the point. So as we go through each one of these, we have that particular reality that we have to deal with. So you're going to have to get dials, and I recommend getting dials that have the registration numbers in front of them or come with them, not like this that you have to produce. This is a cheap way of doing it. These dials, as I said, can be, I've seen some as inexpensive as 20 cents up to several dollars, but if you buy it, so that means you're cutting your cost dramatically. If you're able to print out something like this and then adheres it onto a plate here. So you're going to need 2 copper plates. They should be 100% copper plates so that you can put things on it, not using circuit board like this. As I said, that's a cheap and sloppy way of doing it. You're going to have to get those dials. Again, this is something you need to work on. To find these, again, on most countries you can get it. If you go to eBay, Amazon, etc., you'll find lots and lots of, they call them knobs, that you can find out there. Find one that works well. You also, so you're going to need 2 copper plates, and as I said, those should be pure and thick. Don't use copper sheeting. Use copper plate. You're also going to need in and out. I like to use a lot of these, but you can, these are actual jacks that you plug in, so you can plug into another device, go out to an amplifier, and in, of course, where you can send energy into the unit in total. So in and out jacks are very important as well, and having more of those is important. Now, some people, this was just, again, a prototype. This is if there was some sort of electricity going through it, but some people like to put on and off knobs anyway because it kind of signifies that a unit is on. The problem with that is that there is no electricity going through this period. This is an electrical jack. I'm not sure why that was put on there, but because you're not going to feed electricity through these. There's no reason to. It doesn't have anything to do with the process. Again, you're probably confused about that. Now, some people had electrical connections to their machines. Copen was famous for this. All his machines are non-electric, but when you put an electric thing in like this, he had a light up here, and the light would go on when you flip the switch, and that was to kind of let you know that it was on. But it has nothing to do with the process. Radionic circuits do not produce electrical energy in any shape or form. So turning something on, and the electricity that goes on to most units is to either power the light or to trigger something else or power something else in the unit, not for the dialing that go with it. So we do have to fully and completely understand that. And as I said, we talked about the box, and you can make something as big and as small as you want. This, as I said, is about, what is that, about 2 inches deep. We've got about 6-7 inches in the width, and this is probably 9 or 10 inches in length for a typical unit like this. But you can make it smaller or larger. It's totally up to you. Generally, this is a nice size, and so are these plates. These are about 3-inch by 2-inch plates that you can use here as well. These are 3.5 jacks. You can use RCA as well. 3.5 is kind of the industry standard in terms of what's out there to plug things in. So 3.5 jacks is good, but any jack would work to a degree, but it's usually 3.5 or RCA type jacks that you put in. Again, dials or knobs, as they call them when you're looking up online, can be any type that you wish, depending on how much you want to spend on them. And as I said, I prefer to have dials that the knobs are printed on, so they have that already there. So instead of actually printing yourself. But that's up to you. Again, this all saves money. Something that I don't really recommend. It's better saving up or working extra hours or doing whatever it takes to buy a professionally made unit from me for $400 than it is to actually make it yourself. Because there's all sorts of little steps here that aren't done correctly are problems. But, as a beginner model, as a training model, like training shoes, training bras, training planes, whatever it may be, this certainly can give you an idea of the entire way of doing things. Now, we're going to get into the wiring here next, and that'll be part 3 of this training section on how to make your own radionic unit, how to build your own radionic unit.